Tonight's show all about redistricting Prop 50. We're going to be joined by a special guest, former Congressman Mike Garcia, to talk all about that. And we're going to get into it just tonight on this episode of California Underground Podcast, starting right now. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning to another episode of the California Underground Podcast, the most trusted podcast for all things California politics. I am your host, Phil, and tonight's show is all about redistricting. I know we've talked a lot about it, but it is very important, and it's a short amount of time before we all head to the polls to vote on Prop 50. We are joined by former Congressman Mike Garcia. And before we get started, if you haven't already, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review. Helps with the algorithm. And let's go ahead and welcome him in. Mike, welcome to the show. And as always, with me, my trusty co-host, the best, the fastest researcher in the West, Camille. Mike, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Phil. Appreciate it, Camille. Good to see you as well.
Great.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. We have a lot to talk about tonight because I know on the show we've talked about redistricting. We've touched upon it. We've done little news hits on it. But you're here today to really kind of help us dive into redistricting and kind of get a full lay of the land, what Prop 50 is about. Now that the language is out, it's going to be on the ballot. Before we get started, why don't you take a minute to introduce to our listeners and viewers who you are, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So Mike Garcia from Southern California. I live in North Los Angeles County in Santa Clarita, a little town in the suburbs of Los Angeles. One of the few utopias still left in California. San Diego's beautiful as well, down in your neck of the woods. But born and raised in Southern California in LA County. I served in the military. I was an F-18 fighter pilot for roughly 14 years, carrier-based. Served in Iraq and in Afghanistan, Iraq in 2003, multiple deployments. Aboard the USS Nimitz, so saw combat operations and did so out of aviation, but primarily out of a love of country and wanting a beautiful country. After the Navy, I was an executive at the Raytheon Company for about 11 years, and following the 2018 elections, I decided that in the wake of the blue wave that I needed to get off the sidelines and that I couldn't just complain about what was going on in politics at the federal level or at the state level for that matter, without wanting and being willing to do something about it. So got the idea to run for Congress and began that process and that really journey of Providence in 2019 and ended up winning this seat. It was at the time the 25th congressional district, and it was the first time in about 22 years where a Republican was actually able to flip a seat that was held by an incumbent Democrat in California. The other wild stat, by the way, if I had known about any of these stats, I probably would not have run in the first place, just given how long of a shot this all seemed at the time. But I was also the first Republican member of Congress from California since 1883, which is kind of unbelievable. It's hard to believe that there weren't more Hispanic Republicans in office from California, but that was the case. So served for 5 years, ended up becoming a victim myself of redistricting and the process that took place in 2021, drew a new map in the wake of my special election and then the general election in 2020, and ran in a very blue map in 2022. That map continued to get bluer as time went on, and we ultimately couldn't defy gravity for the following election, lost in 2024. In what became effectively a D+8, D+9 seat, meaning the Democrat Party had a 8 or 9 point registration advantage. So that was a tough thing to overcome, especially in a presidential cycle. So continue to live here in California, and I appreciate what you guys are doing because I don't want to leave California. I think the goal is to try to help California get better, and education and awareness as to what's going on in the local politics scene as well as at the state level is very important. And I tell people, look, my job as a federal legislator and my job while I was in the Navy was not to save California necessarily, but It was to try to help prevent the country from turning into California. And as much as I love our beautiful state, the beautiful weather, the beautiful people, the great jobs we have here, the mountains, the ocean, our policies are terrible. And frankly, those are all man-made problems. We've seen it with not just the riots and the fires recently, but the taxes, the crime rates, the spending that's out of control, the massive deficits, and it's all the product of human beings who are running the show up in Sacramento, unfortunately, and that's why we got to continue to fight this good fight.
Yeah, I remember your race, and it was sort of a inspirational race in the sense that you had flipped a seat that had not been flipped in a long time, and it kind of because I feel like on this show we always talk about like, oh, you got to pay attention to politics, you got to vote, you got to get out and vote, and there's so many people in California who are down on voting in California. There's all the conspiracy theories and the tinfoil hat stuff of, it's all rigged from the moment you show up to the votes and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, you got to look at these races, and like your race when you won was one of those races where it's like, it does matter that you do show up and you actually vote. So your race was one of those inspirational races to say there's hope. There is hope. You can change California if you actually show up. We'll get to the story about how you were a victim of redistricting. So you know what might be coming down the pike a little bit with Prop 50. But I want to go back for our listeners and viewers and sort of talk about how this all started. And we talk about a lot here the retaliation, what Gavin Newsom has been saying and going out and making sure he gets plenty of press coverage for. But I feel like there's a lot of stuff that how did we even get here? Why is there Prop 50? Why did Newsom feel like he had to retaliate? Like, what even started this snowball rolling down the hill? If you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and we'll go back even a little bit further. Obviously, the Texas redistricting efforts were cited by Newsom as sort of the catalyst and motivation for him doing what he's doing now, and frankly, what the state legislators are doing as well in Sacramento. And usually, we only talk about these things, at the turn of a decade. In 2020, the census took place, and that yields a new map. Every state has a different rule, right? And per the Constitution, I believe it's Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. The Constitution states that the time, manner, and location of elections is up to the individual states. It's one of the key elements of federalism that our country abides by for 250 years, right? So, and in that interpretation of how the time, manner, and location of elections is executed by the states, each state has developed its own method of drawing their maps. I would submit, and I'm a strong federalist, but I was also born in California, and I've also seen the inside of DC pretty closely. I would submit that the country would be better shape if at the federal level, the way we drew maps was standardized, was normalized in terms of not just the map drawing itself, but what counts towards a census in terms of the number of people on a map. For instance, at the end of a census, the total number of people are counted, but they don't account for citizens or immigrants, legal or otherwise. So they may not be able to vote, but they do change the makeup and the quantity of human beings in each map. Okay, California has decided that, and this goes back several decades now, that we are going to establish an independent commission, and that this independent commission is going to be made up of both Democrats and Republicans, and maybe a few independents sprinkled in. They're going to go out and they're going to listen to the towns, the cities, the counties, local entities, whether it's local libraries, schools, gun clubs, right? They're all allowed to come in and testify as to why they want to be part of the 25th district as opposed to the 26th district. Why do I want to be in a district with Ventura County instead of Los Angeles? That process typically takes over a year, sometimes 18 months. That's what we underwent in 2020, leading up to the new maps that were published in 2021 and 2022. Okay, that is our law. California and primarily Newsom, in response, and this is his rationale for this movement is it's in response to Texas's way of doing business and its desire to change its maps mid-cycle as well. is now proposing to put a bill on a ballot for a popular vote come November 4th to determine whether or not this independent commission is going to continue to exist. The people are going to vote on whether or not we're going to dissolve this independent commission or basically move forward with these, or keep the independent commission, keep the maps that we have, and if we remove the independent commission, draw entirely new maps, which, by the way, are already drawn. So the people aren't going to have an influence or an impact on what the maps are going to look like because a third party has already done that homework for us. And it's extremely overweighted to the Democrat side. You can imagine. We only have currently, I believe we have 11 seats out of 52. So roughly 9. Sorry.
Sorry, I got to try to correct you. We only have 9. It's worse than that.
Yeah, it's actually worse. So 17%, 9 becomes 17% out of 52 when we had about 42% of the popular vote within the congressional races. These new maps will knock out probably 4 seats, and we can talk about who survives and who doesn't, which takes us down to roughly 6.5%, maybe 7% representation at the federal level in Congress. And the popular vote in this special election will probably be closer to 45% if it passes. So in terms of party registration. So that's where we're at right now. It's a changing of the rules. And I want to go back, Phil, even a little bit further, because this tendency to change the rules because they don't like the outcome has become a very systemic problem. It's a behavioral pattern that we've noticed. If you recall, when the Supreme Court started making decisions about 3 or 4 years ago that the far left wasn't in favor of, they started talking about adding justices or packing the courts, literally changing the rules midstream because they didn't like the results. When you saw the Senate flip and you started seeing the Senate, and even before it flipped, when it was such a thin majority that the Democrats held in the Senate, they started talking about ending the filibuster, which would require 60 votes for an initiative or for a bill to pass in the Senate. So literally changing the rules, changing the way they vote and pass laws in the Senate. When that wasn't good enough, they started talking about adding DC and Puerto Rico as states so that they can get effectively 4 more senators, 2 from each district that would become states, that they knew damn well were going to be very blue and would yield 4 Democrat votes. So again, changing the rules. When Nancy Pelosi took control of the House as the Speaker a few years back, her first bill was H.R. 1, which effectively codifies California's election laws at the federal level. So not only violates the constitutional clause that I cited earlier, that the time, manner, and location is up to the states by federalizing election laws, but then chooses the worst state of all in terms of how elections are run. And that's not a subjective thing, by the way. That's not me, complaining because we lost this seat. This is one of the few states in the country where voter ID is not required, where you're allowed to have same-day registration, 100% universal vote by mail without any proof of citizenship. There's no sanitization of the registration rolls, meaning they don't actually go through and determine who's still here, who's alive, who's moved. The ballots are sent regardless. They allow for ballot harvesting. They allow for ballot curing. All of these things are taboo in most states, and even the voter ID, which has been one of the more sensitive topics, 70%, 35 out of 50 states actually already have a requirement for some form of ID. Okay, but Nancy wanted to formalize California election laws as H.R. 1, and when she was the Speaker. The same group that wanted to try to convince us that Afghanistan was a success, that inflation was transitory, that defunding the police wouldn't lead to higher crime rates, and that it was out of the notion of equity, which is a good thing for the country somehow instead of equality. The same group that was trying to forgive student debt and say that was constitutional and a right. The same group that was calling the weather balloon that crossed our entire country, or a spy balloon, a weather balloon, a couple of years ago when China was able to do this. So they have a tendency to change the rules, change the definitions, change the way they conduct themselves in order to get political gains and gain more power. The House has right now a 2 or 3 seat majority held by the Republicans. Newsom sees this as a problem, especially if he's going to run for president. and in the meantime, try to be a check and frankly, nullify most of the progress that the Trump administration can do, at least from a legislative perspective in the House. And he's leaning on this notion that this was in response to Texas, which is completely false. It's not in response to Texas. What Texas did was a judicial reckoning that the Department of Justice had required them to do since 2021, in the wake of some court decisions that we can talk about. What Newsom and what the California state legislative bodies members are trying to do is for political purposes, not for judicial review. So that's where we're at in a nutshell. It's a long story to get here, but it's very important that people understand that background, and frankly, these behavior patterns are very dangerous.
Yeah, that's always the short annotated version of, well, we're doing it because Texas is trying to get more seats or gerrymander more seats. And then, of course, Trump says something and then it gets blown out of proportion, and then they hang their hat on that and they just scream for the heavens about what Trump says. And, to the lay person, they hear, oh, Texas is just redrawing their maps so they can get Trump more Republicans in Congress. But as you were just saying, that's not the entire case. This came about because of other factors. And for one, I've said on this show, I'm not a fan of this idea of mid-decade redistricting just based on a whim, because it does cause this sort of back and forth where now all of a sudden you have all these different states who are getting in on it going, well, now I want to redistrict, or I want to redistrict. Now Illinois wants to redistrict. You got Massachusetts who wants to redistrict, even though there's not one Republican congressman in all of Massachusetts, so I don't know what they'd be redistricting.
That map didn't break their way, so they gave up on that one pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, don't waste the time, but tell us a little bit about why did even Texas start their process that kind of started this whole process or this whole storyline?
So back in 2021, there was a court case, the United States, this was under Biden, the United States versus Texas. So literally the federal government versus one of its states, that said that the way the maps were drawn were discriminatory by nature. At the same time, there has been this process at the local levels, especially. You see it in city council seats right now at the city level, where they try to draw maps that are representative of the way the demographics are in a given area, right? So, and at first blush, that sounds like a noble concept. It sounds right. It sounds equal, but it's really not. That's not how maps should be drawn. That's not how maps historically have been drawn. But there's been a lot of litigation on this issue. And so the federal government sues the state of Texas saying, hey, your current maps are discriminatory in nature. They're not accounting for the racial demographic breakup and effectively should be redrawn as a result. At the same time, there was a League of United Latin American Citizens who joined in similar litigation against the state of Texas, trying to get more what would be effectively minority districts redrawn. However, everything kind of changes in 2024 when you've got the Fifth Circuit in the Petaway versus Galveston County ruling, which says that these minority districts or these coalition districts are effectively not violations of Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act, effectively saying that these aren't legitimate claims, that these lawsuits are not grounded on substantiated assertions, and that these maps don't need to be reflective of what was being asserted in the United States versus Texas lawsuit. Okay, so now we're in a position where the maps have changed, and the state of Texas is now trying to abide by a 2024 court decision to get back to what was effectively the right maps, or closer to the right maps, given some of the demographic shifts since then. The census populations have changed. And Texas, frankly, their constitution says that, and again, going back to the Constitution, the federal Constitution says that it's up to the states. In this case, the Texas state constitution says that it's up to the state legislative body to determine the maps and the timing of the new maps. And so this is completely constitutional per state law. It's consistent now with the judicial branch rulings coming out of the 2024 cases, and they're truing up back to what both the judicial and the executive branches have asked them to go do. Okay, that has yielded, obviously, what I referred to as the purse slapping, which is other states saying, hey, if you're going to do it, then we're going to do it to you. And it's effectively, slapping each other across the face with these new maps. And like you said, other states can get involved here, and this can be, effectively mutually assured destruction if every state decided that it was going to control, alt delete the timing and the rules that they've set in place. By the way, Texas isn't doing that; they're just abiding by their own rules. Newsom doing the control, alt delete of their own rules, but if Florida, Indiana, we talked about Texas, but also Missouri tried to do this, the net result would be very favorable to conservatives. It would break in the way of the Republican Party by 5 to 6 more seats in the House. Newsom needs to be careful. He's playing with fire. I personally don't think it's popular. I don't think the special election in a vacuum with full education and awareness and with good election laws would have a chance to pass. Unfortunately, a lot of these initiatives rely on underinformed voters. They rely on tricky messaging. Commercials will be, to the tune of $500 million from both sides, marketing this with spin and with words that have nothing to do with actually what's going on to try to trick people. Just like the bridges and highways bill that ended up being our gas tax had nothing to do with bridges and highways in the end, right? The Inflation Reduction Act had nothing to do with inflation in the end. The president didn't even acknowledge that. So it does have a chance, especially with the election laws in California. I don't trust them. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but anytime you have election laws that have enough, leeway in terms of how ballots are counted, where they're counted, who the ballots are going to, you can drive a truck through the registration rules right now, the way they're written, and they're not updated for the last 20 years or so. It's got a chance to pass.
So I listened to everything you said. I heard you. I just want to clarify because I feel like this is such an important point. Texas, what they're doing now under President Trump began under President Biden. Yes?
That's right. Yes. It was in reaction. The initial catalyst for their movement was the result of a case in 2021 when the DOJ sued Texas. Yeah.
Okay. That's fascinating. I heard you. I just really wanted to clarify that point because it's such an important point as people are, and I'll admit that I haven't fully understood the Texas part of things, and you explained it very well. So I very much appreciate that. So thank you. Because I think I sent you a timeline that I asked AI about of all these lawsuits, and there were so many in Texas that that one started, and then people started suing the state, and a lot of them got thrown out. And I was just like, Phil's the lawyer, I'll just send this to him. like maybe he'll explain it to me. But so thank you, I appreciate that. You did an excellent job of explaining that.
And by the way, Camille, I'm not trying to make the assertion that it was politically motivated that the DOJ did what they did. They may have with good intention and thought they were doing it on good legal grounds. But the reality is that the same DOJ and the same judicial branch, in this case, the Fifth Circuit, 3 years later, overruled that ruling, right? And in 2024 decided. I'll assume pure intent across the board for both cases and pure motivations. But they are where they are as a result of those cases in Texas, at least.
That's actually fascinating to me because I didn't know that. I'm going to admit, and I didn't know that it. And like you said, it wasn't probably intentional or political. It's just one of those things that had probably the unintended consequence that probably the Biden administration DOJ started when they did this. So for anybody who's listening and they get into a tit for tat about this and say, oh, well, Trump is doing it because he wants to gerrymander. Well, you can say, well, actually, it's a result of the Biden administration DOJ suing to cure the maps and all of that. I did want to talk about, real quickly, because I know people in the chat are probably going to want to talk about this as well. I certainly agree that there are a lot of things about California's voting that is, to the rest of the country, looks wild.
It's insane.
You tell people like they I go back east, I visit friends. I'm from New Jersey, and they go, "What is this ballot harvesting? What the heck is ballot harvesting?" I'm like, "Well, if you don't vote, someone can say, hey, so and so didn't vote, so we have your information. We'll go to your house and say, you're not voting. Can we take your ballot? Or you can do that. And then we're just going to harvest all these ballots and just dump them in." and maybe I'm an old curmudgeon, but I think if you're too lazy to get off your butt and actually go vote, that vote just won't get cast. That's the end of that vote. Like, I don't think these are
Well, not only that, even
tokens.
under
So.
the traditional rules, right? Even if you're too lazy, or say you're not able to, right? You're elderly or you have a disability. In most states, you can request a mail-in absentee ballot. If you're military or overseas, these are all very valid, reasonable accommodations. The state of California goes even further, though, by saying not only can you ballot harvest, but there's really no reason to ballot harvest in our state. You're mailed a ballot with a self-addressed stamped envelope that's free. So as long as you can walk to your mailbox, which I assume most can. By the way, people should be offended if they're told that they can't get to their own mailboxes. Just like minorities should be offended that asking for a voter ID is racist. That's absurd. With the last name of Garcia, if someone tells me I'm a minority and I should be offended by voter ID, the implication is that I can't get a driver's license because my last name is Garcia. That's wild to me. That's the offensive piece, right? It's the sum of the parts that yields a broken system. That's two key issues within our election laws. And by the way, they're very reasonable issues. We would be okay as a state. We'd still have a hard time as conservatives, but at least we would know we have a fair fight, even in blue districts. Those two changes are voter ID, should be very reasonable, very rational. Everyone's required to show an ID getting on a plane. Everyone's had that conversation. That should be a default answer. Voter ID should be a short putt. The second thing is the sanitization of the registration rolls. We have lost population. I don't know what the numbers are. Last I checked, it was like 2 million fewer people living in California than just 6 years ago. It's why we lost a congressional seat in the House. We would probably lose 2 more if the census was redone right now because of the exodus. But there are now still more ballots going out every election than there were just 3 years ago. Definitely more than 6 years ago. Okay, so they are not, when your kid goes to college, they still get a ballot. When your dad or grandfather dies, they still get a ballot. And by the way, it's mailed to their last address on record, not even where they live necessarily. So God knows who's getting it. And I'm not saying that there's fraud, but that sure opens the window for fraud when you can ballot harvest. So there's no tracking of where the ballot's been. You can cure ballots, so you can just sign these ballots and submit them after the election. You got 30 days to send the ballot in, and then you've got something like 10 days after the election day for the ballot to arrive. By the way, the legislators in Sacramento are trying to change that rule so that you can actually send your ballot a week after in that case. But that sure makes it easy to do the math.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know this point has. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I know this point has been beaten to death that you just brought up the plane arguments, but I had this thought just the other night that I realized every state in the United States, to get a marriage license, you have to show ID. So I guess marriage is also racist. And
there's all
not
sorts
to
of, yeah.
totally off the hook, but I'm almost okay with that because I'm like, wait, why did we give marriage to the government anyway? Anyway, that's a whole different topic, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah. I understand where you're going with that one, but yeah, it's absurd. These excuses make no sense. The bottom line is all of these rules, which would effectively have been HR1, which if the Dems had control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, and were able to pass their legislation when they had the control, HR1 would have codified our laws at the state level into every 50 of the states around us in the entire country. There is no rationale for these things except for political purposes in a very blue state. That's all it is. They'll do it under the auspices of equity, which isn't guaranteed by our Constitution. You guys know equality is guaranteed by our Constitution, not equity. And they'll couch it as, hey, we're trying to do the right thing. These aren't the right thing. It's not the right thing for anyone. So it's all smoke and mirrors, at least from California.
I want to echo your point about the idea of, well, we can't have voter ID because it will hurt minorities. And my wife grew up in Tijuana, and she tells me about how the elections are run down in Mexico. And I'm always like, okay, well, let's concede that we'll run elections like Mexico. 1 day voting, voter ID, pretty sure you put your finger in the 24-hour ink so that you can't come back later on. Now, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other issues with Mexican voting because of cartels and stuff like that. But I'm just saying the procedure, if that's, I mean, that seems fine. I mean, I guess that's racist to them is to require voter ID. So you can tell all of Mexico that they're racist. It just becomes more of a numbers game. It's more like they see these printouts and this data information, these voter rolls, and go, we have this many voters. You know, we have a 2-to-1 advantage basically on the Republicans and the independents. So if we just know that we can get more votes by making it longer, by making it easier for us to go get those votes, it's like Pokemon Go. It's just like, let's go collect them all. It's not about getting people to the vote to actually exercise their voice in this process. These are numbers. We just need to get these numbers in. And it doesn't matter whether we have good policies or bad policies. It's how many people's ballots and these numbers can we check off here in California? And that's the upsetting thing, is that at the end of the day, you can say, oh, well, this person won, but did they truly win because they had the will of the people, or is it because they had a better ground game that knew how to ballot harvest, that knew how to go cure, that knew how to do all these different election tactics? And some of these races,
we can't even answer that second part with it's not even that, right? I would concede to someone who has a better ground game or someone that's a better ballot harvester or ballot cure. We did that. We won under those circumstances. The problem now is you can't even attribute necessarily to those things, right? Because of the duration of the vote, because of the universal vote by mail, because of the dead people and people who have moved, because of the DMV, defaulting registration to Democrat for so many years before that was rectified a few years ago. Because of these things, we can't even attribute it to a hardworking candidate or a well-funded campaign, even for that matter, right? It's very murky at best. So, and the bottom line is, it's not about race. It's not about because the ID is about proving that you're a legal citizen. That's it. Mexico asked for ID not because they are worried about your race. They just want to make sure that you're a legal Mexican citizen. That's the same thing that they do in Iraq, by the way. Pretty much every country in the world asks for some form of identification. And it's not unprecedented. I want to focus on this because it's not unprecedented. The federal election laws do exist within the Constitution. The Constitution describes who can vote at what age, right? There's an amendment to the Constitution that says 18-year-olds can vote. There's an amendment to the Constitution that says females can vote, that says blacks can vote. All of these things have been codified and formally recognized as in the form of an amendment to our nation's Constitution. We need an amendment to the federal Constitution that requires voter ID. Okay, all it's doing is not changing who can vote or the time, manner, location of the elections per the Constitution. It's just saying, hey, if you're an American citizen and you're of age, prove it. Very rational position to be in. So we do that, and that would solve a lot of the problems. And I think President Trump's going to be pushing for a national federal ID law. This is one of the pieces of legislation that I frankly couldn't get our own party to embrace, because they said it was a California problem, or they said it was a federalism collision, and they weren't comfortable voting for it because of the states' rights issues that it invokes. So this is part of the problem, but we do have a path forward, and it's fixable from the federal level down through the states, and it should be mandated by the Constitution.
So here's my concern. We know California's corrupt. Whether, voter fraud or not, any conspiracies aside, we do know that our current legislation does not seem to honor the will of the people. Governor Newsom is doing this, trying to act like he's a moderate, and he wants to hear the voice of the people. And, I'm just doing this in fairness. And so I'm going to let the people decide. Well, the people decided on Prop 36, which he fought so hard to keep off of the ballot last November. And then he even introduced his own poison bills. And then, on and on, we saw him fight against it, saying we don't need it, it's not necessary, all these things. 36 ends up on the ballot. It overwhelmingly passes in California. And here we are almost a year later, and they're like, oh, we don't have the budget, we're not implementing it. So I worry that even if the people speak up and say, whether it's supermajority, overwhelming, whatever, and they vote no on Prop 50, what are our legislators that are supermajority Democrat and, all bowing down to King Newsom. What are they going to do with that, even if their will fails? Like, that's where I'm concerned, is because we see they just do what they want.
Yeah,
and I don't mean that to scare everyone.
Frustrating. I resonate with that sentiment. It's very disheartening, right? And yeah, the irony of this no kings thing is that we in California have been subjected to effectively a tyrannical majority, a tyrannical monarch in the form of Newsom since COVID hit. And there's plenty of evidence of that, starting with the French Laundry incident, obviously, but. Look, it's very disheartening, but as Phil mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, my election it was proof that votes do matter, right? We won despite we weren't supposed to win. They spent $25 million against me in 2020. They spent 25 to 30 in subsequent elections since then, but we ended up winning by just 333 votes. Okay, the reason we won by just 333 out of 340,000, by the way, so that's 0.01%, I think, was because we worked harder. We did ballot cure. We ballot harvested. We knew the rules. We were better at the game than our Democrat opponent was. And eventually the maps become so blue, right? And that was that was one of the reasons my map was redrawn. I wasn't supposed to win. We won despite that. They made it even bluer, and then we won again in 2022. And then in the presidential cycle in 2024, it became overwhelming. So the point of this is to prevent the squeakers, to prevent the leakers from being able to compete in swing districts like mine used to be. And that's the untold story. Not only are they wiping out 4 seats that incumbents currently hold right now, maybe 5, but they're also taking the swing districts, John Duarte's district in Central California, my district in North LA, Michelle Steele's district, where she lost last cycle by just a few hundred votes. They're turning those swing districts into unwinnable, unobtainable seats for conservatives. And so really, in a midterm, we would have picked up those 3 seats, plus kept the 4. So it's really a 7-seat swing at a minimum relative to what we would have had we kept these maps. So the motivations are very self-evident, especially in this. But and to your point, yeah, we got to fight the fight. We've got to beat down this election. And every time they change the rules, and again, your point's consistent with mine, Camille. They try to change the rules, and when they don't get the results that they want, they will change the rules. They'll change the definitions of things, and it's all levels of government, by the way. Remember, we had 2 or 3 quarters of negative GDP, and President Biden changed the definition of a recession, which was formalized, almost a century ago, where 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, that's a recession by definition. When we experienced that under his tenure, he said, "Oh, that's no longer the definition of recession. This is the tendencies of the left, unfortunately." But we've got to keep fighting it, and that's why it's important to educate people. You don't give up. If you give up, then you should move. But you should, if you're going to be here, you should keep fighting and you should keep voting. And we need to win despite these rules, and we can. We just have to win by a larger margin.
I think it's a perfect segue into where we're at now with Prop 50 and what we're looking at coming down the pike, and this election that's coming up on November 4th. Is that when it's coming up?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
November 4th. Special election. It's the only thing we're voting on. Tell us about Prop 50. And you had mentioned who are, Kevin Kiley's one I know that's obviously being targeted, but there's others that are being targeted who would go from safe Republican to now all of a sudden safe Democrat overnight with Prop 50.
Yeah, we'll start south to north, or at least as close as I can remember them. Daryl Issa down in San Diego, in your neck of the woods, would effectively not really be able to run in his seat. Ken Calvert in San Bernardino Riverside, very swing district, and especially in the presidential cycle, is pretty solid in a midterm. Becomes very blue, solid blue. Kevin Kiley's, you mentioned, was basically drawn out. Young Kim's seat down in Orange County is now in jeopardy. And what we might see is there was a map drawn somewhere in the vicinity of Young Kim and Ken Calvert, maybe in between them. There may be, a decision by one of them to run in that map, but one of them would need to step down if that was the case. So Still unclear what would happen there. So, and then you've got the 3 swing seats, Duarte's mine and Michelle Steele's down in Orange County that was very much in play in these old maps. So the lone survivors would be McClintock, in the Sierra Nevada, Vince Fong just to the north of me, Kevin McCarthy's old seat there in Bakersfield, Obernolte seat out in East Riverside, up into the mountains, Mammoth, Bishop area. And then maybe, like I said, a seat down in Orange County. That would be what we would be left with, effectively 4 healthy seats at that point. So, and ironically, they're all, the common denominator for all of them is that they're more than 50 miles away from the coast. And when you look at the maps that were drawn, the shape of these maps is ridiculous. You want to look up the definition of gerrymandering. I mean, it's ridiculous at a granular level, the effort that they went to make sure that they were screwing conservatives in this state. It's pretty eye-watering. It's actually impressive for evil genius type level of metrics there that they were able to pull this off. This map is a Tetris of the highest levels. So, but I don't think the voters are going to fall for it. I think there's going to be a lot of spinning and a lot of words, a lot of money being spent. But I honestly think that voters, if they take the time to understand it, will not vote for it. And I think that's true even for Democrats. I have a lot of friends who are liberals. They don't appreciate these types of shenanigans and politically motivated actions like this. So, but again, that's in a perfect scenario. I don't know that we're going to have that.
I am actually in Young Kim's district, District 40, and the city that I am in is very conservative still. It's definitely slowly but surely getting lower and lower, but historically we have been like bright red, blood red, very red. And yeah, now I'm drawn into that, possibly drawn into a blue district. And that's obviously very bothersome.
Yeah. At least Katie Porter's not down there anymore. She might be our new governor, but she's not. She won't be here.
I mean, again, not to get off topic, but I don't feel like people are talking about her.
No, she's made herself irrelevant. So, and there's still a lot of time left on the clock. But
true.
She's always trying to insert herself.
That was a scary thought. Why would you put that out in the universe, Mike? Katie Porter.
Fun fact: her brother it was my roommate at the Naval Academy back in the late 90s.
Oh.
And he makes her, he's so far left, he makes her look like Ronald Reagan. He is probably the furthest left naval officer or officer in the military period that I've ever met. That's shocking relative to his sister.
That is pretty shocking to hear that someone's farther left than Katie Porter.
It's doable.
It is, the language is pretty interesting because they keep saying, oh, it's, we're giving this power to the people. It's going to be super transparent. And, it's just this one-time thing, but they're not giving power back to the independent commission until 2030. Is that correct? I thought that's what I read, is that from here until 2030, the independent commission is going to have no control. It's going to be the legislature from here until then, right?
Yeah, it's effectively suspending the state rules until 2030, until the next census happens, which, by the way, isn't going to favor them either. And by the way, I don't have a whole lot of faith in the independent commission, but it's at least transparent. At least we have a venue normally to go testify in front of, and it is more, engaging for the average citizen. But yeah, yes, that they're going to do it under the auspices of transparency and giving power back to the people. The people voted for this already decades ago for this independent commission. There is no transparency. The average citizen right now has no idea what Prop 50 is. You guys are very smart. You're well informed on these issues, but the average voter is not right now. So they're going to be hearing commercials. They're not going to have an option to go to hearings. They're not going to have an option to go to city council meetings to give their inputs for the redistricting, the redrawing. The maps are already drawn. So if you want to say you're giving power to the people, let's vote on this, whether we dissolve the independent commission. But then let's let the people draw the maps. Let's let the people have the forums to go give their inputs for the maps. You have preordained these maps, and now you're asking the people to effectively close their eyes and just give you the benefit of the doubt, hit the I believe button with a regime that should not be believed at all, and frankly has shown a proclivity to do the opposite of what is democratic and transparent.
I think that might be the whole ironic thing about this, that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and I'm trying to at least see from their point of view, their logic, that they're trying to combat disenfranchising voters in Texas, which we've already gone over. They're not actively trying to disenfranchise voters in Texas. But their response to disenfranchising voters in Texas is, let's disenfranchise our own voters here in California. So those people who have representatives, like a Kevin Kiley, like a Young Kim, like all these different congressional members, let's just disenfranchise them. Their vote doesn't matter anymore. We're just going to take their rep away. We're going to disenfranchise them. This is your new district. Get used to it. And it's all because we want to thumb our nose at Trump. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And I mean, is it as confusing to you as it is to me that that's their logic?
No, I mean, there's no rationalizing it, right? It's not confusing when you know that it's just a political tool for them. That's all it is. You can't rationalize it. You can't try to understand the logic. There is no logic except for them trying to rig the rules, change the rules, rig the system. Going from 17 to 18%, representation in the House of Representatives is not, enfranchising anyone. It is disenfranchising at the highest levels. Which, by the way, again, like I said, most Democrat voters, this is not a hit on the Democrat voters in California. This is a hit on Newsom and the 2/3 supermajority up in Sacramento and the state assembly and the state senate. The average voter, when they understand these issues, will not support these types of shenanigans because it doesn't make sense. To your point, Phil, we should try to understand the motives, but in this case, they're pretty blatantly obvious. It's just they're trying to gaslight us into making it sound like it's something that it's not, right? The point is that it's all politically motivated. They are trying to execute the will of a very far left progressive federal agenda, and they are losing on policies. They're losing on execution. They're losing on the issues. They're losing popularity. And they're grasping for straws right now, and this is a form of grasping for straws, and ironically, in a state where straws are illegal. But this is the last gasp of a tyrannical, very far left agenda. By the way, I don't even know Newsom is this far left. He's just trying to get the embrace of the Democrat Party for a presidential nomination going into the presidential cycle. That's all this is. It's like Rick Caruso's not a liberal. He's not a progressive. He's not even a Democrat, but he's willing to spend a lot of money and do whatever is possible to get the warm hug and embrace of the Democrat Party so that he can be a potential nominee for the governor's race in California. These people are selling their souls. It's fear-based behavior rather than principle-based behavior. And they are, at their core, politicians who really don't have the best interests of their constituents in mind. They're doing it for their own political gain. It's that simple.
So we have a question from the chat. Why can't the courts shut down Prop 50 since it's in clear conflict with the California Constitution?
Yeah, so this was the workaround, and this is what, again, I was saying this as well in the very beginning. This is a clear violation. If they were to just impart these maps on the states, implement them, that would be a violation of the state's constitution. They have gone around this violation of the state's constitution by putting it on a special election ballot. Basically, our state's constitution says you can change the rules as long as you put it on a ballot initiative. Okay, so per the letter of the law and the Constitution, what they are doing now is constitutional. And the irony is obviously that they are undoing the independent commission, which was established within our own state's constitution. So again, the litigation is stalling out. We had a number of state, Republican state legislators try to file litigation, and basically the courts in California are saying it's not technically a constitutional violation because they didn't just vote on it, pass it, and sign it into law. They're putting it onto the ballot. They passed it, they signed it, but what they passed and signed was to put it onto a ballot in the special election. So that was the workaround for a technical constitutional violation.
Well, it's an interesting precedent that they can set is, I guess, if you get enough people to sign in a special election, you can temporarily suspend parts of the California Constitution. And I don't know if that's a good precedent that they want to start setting.
Oh, it's absolutely horrible. It's absolutely mutually assured destruction at the federal level. Every state now has the flexibility to do this for political purposes. By the way, it may not just be a Democrat regime in power in Sacramento in 20 years. So this can be reciprocated by either party. So it's very dangerous. It's not responsible. It's not right. And frankly, it's not going to pay off for Newsom. It's not going to pay off for the Democrats in the end anyway.
There was another question about the California DMV and why can they send out ballots to anyone who applies for driver's license? Because we're talking
let me clarify. I was making a reference to DMV registrations. There was a stretch of a few years, and this was rectified a few years ago, where when you went to get your driver's license or get your driver's license renewed, towards the end of your little on-screen checkout thing, where they're asking you to verify your address, verify your age, they ask, one, it defaulted to registering you to vote. Okay, so it didn't for a few years ask you to confirm that you're a U.S. citizen. It didn't ask you to prove that you're a U.S. citizen, and it would still register you to vote. The next thing it did was it would default to registering you as a Democrat. That was just the default answer, right? And again, it was sold under, hey, there was no malicious intent behind this. It's just how our system worked. But the net effect of that was, hundreds of thousands, maybe, probably millions of people were registered to vote, some of which probably shouldn't have been registered to vote, and many of whom were not even Democrats getting registered to vote as Democrats. There was a period where a lot of people got ballots. They were Republicans, and their ballots showed them as Democrats, and they would have to go change that. So that's that is not how it is right now. The DMV has fixed this. A lot of litigation around that, a lot of lawsuits as a result of it. But there was a stretch of a few years, and I don't remember which years, but it was relatively recently where that was the case.
That's a convenient oopsie in one direction. It's one of those things where it's
and it's a one-way valve, right? It's hard to undo that, right? It's hard to unring that bell when someone is, So again, it's plausible deniability, and it breaks one way. It's just an amazing coincidence.
Well, it's amazing.
Always check your voter registration. Everybody listening, check your voter registration. Make sure you're registered to vote for this special election.
Absolutely. Good point.
Well, we're coming up on the hour. Mike, I want to thank you for coming on and detailing everything so well for all of us and for all of our listeners. Is there any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners before we sign off for the night?
Well, I'll just echo Camille's recommendations. Get smart on the issues. Try to educate your friends, family, and neighbors. Don't make this about a Republican versus Democrat. Don't make this about Newsom versus Trump. This is right versus wrong. This is fairness and equality versus a clear power grab by a very tyrannical supermajority. Right? That's not me being biased. The facts are all there. We have to educate people on this issue because the commercials will be gaslighting all of us shortly. And so we've got to make sure that we're doing everything to get the vote out for this one. And by the way, it's probably going to be pretty low voter turnout. So these midterms and special elections. In a special election, when I first ran, I won by 10%, extremely low voter turnout. It was in the presidential cycle where I won by only 333 votes just 5 months later. Okay, so this will be lower voter turnout, which means that our impact, not just with our one vote, but all of the votes that we influence and the people around us, absolutely makes a huge difference. So this is why what you guys are doing is God's work, and we need to continue more of this.
Great. Yep, I agree. It's there is stuff coming up, and I apologize. I said that this was the only thing we're voting. There's a lot of stuff we're voting on.
There's a lot of
this midterm election.
Well, this special election may only be this, from what I understand. Yeah. So this should be relatively focused, which should make it easier.
Focus on this. All right, Mike. Thank you so much for joining. Where can people go and find you if they want to follow more of your thoughts and insights?
Oh God, just Google my name, and I think it's at Mike Garcia 1776 on X and some of the social media. But I'm the chair of the America First Policy Institute California division. This is obviously the think tank that the administration goes to for America First policies. But the president's also paying attention to California. And we've got to, again, use these policies that have been imparted on us by Newsom and his friends up in Sacramento as a blueprint of what not to do. And that's going to be very important over the next 4 years. So appreciate the support. We got to keep fighting this good fight. Got to save our country and prevent it from turning into California.
Can I ask a final question?
Sure, of course.
Do you plan to run again in politics?
No, I had the honor and blessing to serve at the federal level for 5 years. I have no interest in running for Senate. There's no 0.0% chance of a strong conservative winning at the state level right now. The governor's race is unobtainable for a while. Frankly, I don't have aspirations to do it. I've done everything I had wanted to do while in office. We did more in 5 years than most did probably in 10 to 15 years. I'm very proud of my team. At this point, the only thing I would consider from a future government service is Secretary of Defense. That's my sweet spot. National security issues, all things military, all things national security. So that's probably the only thing I'd be willing to make sacrifices in continued service at the federal level, at least. So, but I'll always be at the nation's disposal, and I've been willing to give my life in support of this beautiful country for 49 years, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So we got to keep fighting the good fight.
It's a good answer. Camille's always trying to get the breaking news on whether or not we can get a scoop on someone running or not.
Yeah, why not?
Why not ask, right? Why not?
Steve Hilton is doing a bang-up job with his campaign. We should be getting behind him and focusing our efforts. But California's tough right now. But it's we got to fight that. We got to fight that fight and be an opposition force as well.
100% agree. It's worth fighting for. Well, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in to Mike and Mike for being here. I learned a lot. Those are my favorite type of guests when I learn a lot. If you want to support the show, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review, all that stuff. And the best thing you can do to support the show that is 100% free is share it with someone else who you would think would get a lot out of this show. And we'll see you on the next one. Later, everybody.
Take care, guys.